Jake Martinez was the kind of guy who liked his life simple and predictable. Every morning, he woke up at 7 a.m. sharp, made his coffee the same way, and caught the same bus to his office downtown. He worked as a computer programmer for a small tech company, fixing bugs in software that most people would never even notice. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and kept his mind busy. The only problem with Jake's perfectly organized life was money. Well, not exactly money itself, but the lack of it. His 2-bedroom apartment in Portland cost way more than he could afford alone. The rent was $1,800 every month, which ate up most of his paycheck. He had been looking for a roommate for almost 3 months now, and it was getting desperate. Jake had met with so many people that they all started to blur together. There was the guy who wanted to turn the living room into his personal gym, the woman who insisted on painting every wall bright purple, the college student who seemed nice until Jake found out he was planning to throw parties every weekend. One person even asked if they could keep their pet snake in the bathroom. A snake. Jake was starting to think he might have to move back in with his parents, which at 28 years old felt like admitting defeat. Then came that rainy Tuesday evening in October when everything changed. Jake was sitting on his couch, scrolling through his phone and feeling sorry for himself, when someone knocked on his door. He wasn't expecting anyone, so he looked through the peephole first. Standing outside was a woman he had never seen before. She was beautiful in a way that made Jake forget to breathe for a moment. Her skin was so pale it almost seemed to glow under the hallway lights. Her hair was an unusual silver-white color that looked natural, not dyed. But what really caught his attention were her eyes. They were the brightest blue he had ever seen, like looking into a clear mountain lake on a sunny day. Jake opened the door, feeling suddenly aware that he was wearing his oldest t-shirt and hadn't combed his hair. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "I heard you might have a room available," she said. Her voice was soft and pleasant, with just a hint of an accent that Jake couldn't identify. "I'm looking for a place to stay." Jake blinked. He had posted ads online, but most people called or sent messages first. Nobody just showed up at his door anymore. "Oh, yes, I do have a room. Would you like to see it? That would be wonderful," she said, stepping inside when he moved back. "I'm Zara, by the way, Jake," he replied, leading her toward the spare bedroom. As they walked, he noticed she moved very quietly. Her footsteps barely made any sound on the wooden floor. The room was basic but clean. It had a window facing the street, enough space for a bed and dresser, and its own small closet. Jake had seen at least 20 people look at this same room, and most of them found something to complain about. The window was too small, or the closet wasn't big enough, or they didn't like the color of the walls. Zara looked around for maybe 30 seconds, then nodded. "This is perfect," she said. "When can I move in?" Jake was so surprised he almost laughed. "Don't you want to know about the rent or see the rest of the apartment? Most people have questions about utilities and parking and stuff like that." "How much is the rent?" she asked. $900 a month, plus half of utilities. That usually comes to about another 100 or so. Zara reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Here's 6 months in advance," she said, handing it to him. Jake opened the envelope and found $6,000 in cash, real cash. He had never seen so much money in one place before. Wow, are you sure? Most people just pay month to month. I prefer to pay ahead," Zara said simply. "It makes things easier." Jake wanted to ask easier for whom, but he was too amazed by his luck to push it. After months of dealing with difficult people, here was someone who seemed perfect. She was quiet, polite, and had just solved his biggest problem in under 5 minutes. "Do you need references or anything?" Jake asked, remembering he was supposed to be responsible about this kind of thing. Zara smiled, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes that Jake couldn't identify. "I prefer to keep my past private," she said, "but I can promise you I'm a very good roommate. I'm quiet, I keep things clean, and I won't cause any trouble." Looking back later, Jake would realize this should have been a warning sign. Normal people had jobs they could talk about, friends who could vouch for them, previous landlords who could give references. But at the time, he was just grateful to find someone who seemed normal and had money. "Okay," he said. "When do you want to move in? Is tonight too soon?" Jake laughed, thinking she was joking. But Zara's expression didn't change. She was completely serious. "Tonight? Don't you need time to pack and arrange for movers or something?" "I don't have much stuff," Zara said. "I live a simple life." And that was how Jake Martinez got the perfect roommate. Within 2 hours, Zara had moved in with just a small suitcases and a backpack. No furniture, no boxes of books, no kitchen supplies. Jake offered to help her get settled, but she said she preferred to handle things herself. For the first few days, Jake hardly saw her. She said she worked night shifts at some kind of research facility outside the city. She would leave around sunset and come back just before dawn. During the day, she stayed in her room, presumably sleeping. It was exactly what Jake had hoped for in a roommate, someone who wouldn't get in his way or disrupt his routine. But as the first week turned into the second, Jake started noticing little things that seemed off. For one thing, Zara never seemed to eat anything. His refrigerator and pantry looked exactly the same as before she moved in. When he asked her about it, she said she usually ate at work or grabbed something while she was out. Fair enough, Jake thought. Lots of people lived that way. Then there were his electronics. His laptop, which had always worked perfectly, started doing weird things. Programs would be running when he woke up that he was sure he hadn't opened. His smart TV would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, always tuned to channels that showed nothing but static. His phone began receiving calls from numbers that weren't real phone numbers at all, just random strings of digits that didn't follow any pattern he recognized. Jake mentioned these problems to Zara one evening when they happened to be in the kitchen. At the same time, she was standing by the window, looking out at the street with that strange, distant expression she often wore. "Maybe you should call someone to look at them," she suggested without turning around. Electronics can be unpredictable. Her tone was so casual, so unconcerned, that Jake found it more disturbing than helpful. These weren't normal technical problems. His laptop was only 6 months old, and his phone was brand new. TVs didn't just turn themselves on for no reason. But Zara acted like this kind of thing happened all the time. As October turned into November, Jake began to feel like he was living with a ghost. Zara was always polite when they crossed paths, but she never really seemed present. She would nod and smile and make small talk about the weather, but her eyes always looked like she was thinking about something else entirely, something far away. Jake told himself he was being paranoid. So what if his roommate was a little weird? She paid her rent on time, kept her space clean, and didn't bother him. After all the terrible roommate stories he had heard from friends, he should be grateful. But late at night, when his TV turned on by itself or his phone rang with impossible numbers, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that bringing Zara into his life had somehow opened a door to something he didn't understand. He had no idea how right he was or how much stranger things were about to become. By the time November arrived, Jake had been living with Zara for almost a month, and he was starting to realize just how little he actually knew about his roommate. At first, he had been so relieved to find someone who seemed normal and paid rent on time that he hadn't asked too many questions. But now, those questions were keeping him awake at night. The biggest mystery was Zara's schedule. She claimed to work night shifts, leaving every evening around 7 and returning just before sunrise. But Jake had started paying closer attention, and something didn't add up. When he got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, he never heard her moving around. No footsteps in the hallway, no shower running, no sounds of someone getting ready for work. It was like the apartment was completely empty except for him. One Saturday morning, Jake decided to test his theory. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read news on his laptop while actually watching the hallway. At exactly 6:45, he heard Zara's bedroom door open. She appeared in the hallway, dressed in dark clothes that looked expensive but somehow timeless. Her silver hair was perfect, as always, and her skin had that same pale glow he had noticed the first night they met. "Good morning," she said, giving him that polite smile he had grown accustomed to. "Morning," Jake replied, heading to work. "Yes." "Another long night ahead," Zara said, walking toward the front door. Jake waited until he heard the door close, then quickly moved to the living room window that faced the street. He watched as Zara walked down the front steps of their building and onto the sidewalk. But instead of heading toward the bus stop or looking for a taxi like any normal person would, she simply continued walking down the street until she disappeared. Round the corner, Jake grabbed his jacket and followed Dot. By the time he reached the corner, Zara was nowhere to be seen. Jake walked for 3 blocks in the direction she had been heading, checking every doorway and side street, but it was like she had vanished into thin air. He stood there on the sidewalk, feeling foolish and confused. How could someone just disappear like that? When he got back to the apartment, Jake decided to do something he probably shouldn't have done. He listened at Zara's bedroom door. Complete silence. He knocked softly and waited. No response. After a few minutes of internal debate, he gently tried the door handle. It turned easily, and the door swung open. Jake's jaw dropped. The room was completely empty. Not just unoccupied, but actually empty. There was no bed, no dresser, no clothes hanging in the closet. The walls were bare, the floor was clean, and there wasn't a single personal item anywhere. It looked exactly like it had the day before Zara moved and Jake stood in the doorway, his mind racing. This was impossible. He had seen Zara coming and going from this room every day for weeks. Where did she sleep? Where were her clothes? Where was all the stuff that normal people accumulated when they lived somewhere? He spent the next hour searching the entire apartment, looking for any sign of where Zara might actually be staying. He checked closets, looked under furniture, even opened cabinets in the kitchen. Nothing. It was like she existed only in the brief moments when Jake actually saw her. That evening, Jake positioned himself in the living room with a clear view of the front door. He wanted to see how Zara would react when she came home and found out he had discovered her secret. But 7 o'clock came and went with no sign of her. So did 8 o'clock, and 9, and 10. Finally, around 11:30, Jake heard a key in the lock. Zara walked in looking exactly the same as when she had left that morning. Her clothes weren't wrinkled, her hair wasn't messed up, and she didn't look tired like someone who had just finished a long shift at work. "How was work?" Jake asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Fine, thank you," Zara replied. "I think I'll go to bed now." "Zara, wait," Jake said, standing up. "I need to ask you something." She turned to look at him, and for just a second, Jake thought he saw something flicker in her bright blue eyes. Something that wasn't entirely human. "What is it, Jake?" "I went into your room today," he said. "It's empty, completely empty." "Where do you actually sleep?" Zara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Then she laughed. But it didn't sound quite right. It was too musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I'm redecorating," she said. "I moved everything into storage while I decide how. I want to arrange things. I've been sleeping on an air mattress." Jake wanted to point out that he hadn't seen any air mattress, or any sign that anyone had been sleeping in that room at all. But something in Zara's expression warned him not to push too hard. "Oh," he said, "that makes sense. I guess I should have mentioned it," Zara said. "I didn't want to bother you with the details." After she disappeared into her room, Jake lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The redecorating explanation was obviously fake, but what was the real truth? Was Zara some kind of criminal hiding from the police? Was she involved in something illegal that required her to keep her living situation secret? Or was there an even stranger explanation that Jake's rational mind wasn't ready to consider? Over the next few days, Jake became obsessed with watching Zara more carefully. He started noticing things that he had somehow missed before. She never seemed to blink, not even once during their conversations. When she walked, her feet barely seemed to touch the ground, like she was floating just slightly above the floor. Her skin never showed any imperfections, no scars, no freckles, no signs of aging or wear. Most disturbing of all, Jake realized that he had never actually seen Zara eat or drink anything. Not once. She would hold a glass of water sometimes when they talked in the kitchen, but Jake never saw her actually take a sip. She claimed to eat at work, but Jake had started checking the refrigerator obsessively, and nothing ever went missing. Jake also noticed that his electronic problems were getting worse. His laptop would be running strange programs when he woke up, programs with names written in symbols he didn't recognize. His TV now turned on every single night at exactly 3:33 a.m., always showing the same channel of static. His phone had started displaying text messages that appeared to be written in code, strings of numbers and symbols that hurt his eyes to look at. When Jake tried to show these messages to his coworkers or friends, they would mysteriously disappear from his phone. It was like the messages only existed when he was alone in the apartment. He started taking screenshots, but even those would be corrupted or empty when he tried to show them to other people. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. When Jake was working late on his laptop in the living room, he heard Zara's door open and close, but when he looked up, she wasn't in the hallway. A few minutes later, he heard the front door open and close, but he hadn't seen anyone walk past him to get there. Jake got up and checked Zara's room again. Empty, as always. He checked every other room in the apartment. No one there. But he was absolutely certain he had heard someone moving around. That night, Jake made a decision. He was going to stay awake and watch. He was going to figure out what was really going on with his mysterious roommate, even if it meant giving up sleep. Something was very wrong in his apartment, and he needed to know what it was before he lost his mind. Completely. He had no idea that the truth would be far stranger than anything his imagination could have prepared him for. The night that changed everything started like any other Friday evening in late November. Jake had been working on a particularly difficult coding project at the office, trying to fix a bug that had been driving him crazy for weeks. His boss had been breathing down his neck about the deadline, and Jake found himself staying later and later each night just to keep up. By the time he finally solved the problem and saved his work, it was already past 2 in the morning. The office building was completely empty except for the security guard downstairs. Jake packed up his laptop, grabbed his jacket, and headed home through the quiet streets of Portland. A light rain was falling, making the streetlights blur into golden halos in the darkness. All Jake wanted was to get home, brush his teeth, and fall into bed. He was exhausted in a way that went deeper than just being tired. The stress of work, combined with all the weird stuff happening at home with Zara, had been wearing him down for weeks. He kept telling himself that he was overthinking things, that there had to be logical explanations for everything he had been noticing. Jake climbed the stairs to his second-floor apartment, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. He fumbled with his keys for a moment, then quietly let himself in. The apartment was dark and silent, just as he expected it to be. Zara should have been at work at her mysterious night job, and Jake was looking forward to having the place to himself for a few hours. He dropped his laptop bag by the door and headed straight for his bedroom, not bothering to turn on any lights. He knew the layout of his apartment well enough to navigate in the dark, but as he pushed open his bedroom door, Jake froze in absolute shock. There was someone in his bed. For a split second, Jake thought he must have walked into the wrong apartment somehow, but no, this was definitely his room. He could see his dresser, his desk, his clothes hanging in the corner, and lying peacefully in the center of his bed. On top of the covers was Zara, but that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what was happening above her. Floating approximately 3 feet above Zara's still body was what looked like another version of her. This second Zara was made of pure light, glowing with a soft blue radiance that filled the entire room. She had the same face, the same silver hair, the same graceful proportions, but she was translucent, like she was made of starlight and mist. Jake rubbed his eyes hard, certain he must be hallucinating from exhaustion, but when he looked again, the floating figure was still there. As he watched in stunned silence, the glowing version of Zara began to slowly descend toward the physical body lying on the bed below. The moment the two figures touched, there was a flash of brilliant light that made Jake shield his eyes. When he looked again, there was only one Zara, lying normally in his bed as if nothing unusual had happened. But her eyes were now open, and they were glowing with the same blue light he had just witnessed. "Jake," she said calmly, sitting up as if she had been expecting him all along. Her voice sounded different somehow, more musical, with harmonics that seemed to resonate in ways that hurt his ears and soothed them at the same time. "I was wondering when you would finally see me for what I truly am." Jake stumbled backward until his back hit the doorframe. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. What are you?" he managed to whisper. The glow in Zara's eyes gradually faded back to their normal bright blue, but Jake could still see flecks of light dancing in them like tiny stars. For the first time since he had known her, she looked genuinely sad. Not the polite, distant expression she usually wore, but deep, profound sadness that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "I suppose it's time you knew the truth," she said softly, swinging her legs over the side of his bed. "I'm not from here, Jake. Not from this world. Not from this reality as you understand it." Jake's rational mind was screaming that this couldn't be happening. People didn't glow. They didn't separate into multiple versions of themselves. They didn't float in the air like spirits. But he had seen it with his own eyes, and no amount of logical thinking could explain it away. "You're saying you're some kind of alien?" Jake asked, the word feeling strange on his tongue. Zara stood up gracefully, and Jake noticed that her feet didn't quite seem to touch the floor. "That word is so limited," she said. "Your language doesn't have proper terms for what I am. I exist primarily as energy, as consciousness without the need for a physical form. What you see when you look at me is something I create when I need to interact with your world." Jake slid down the doorframe until he was sitting on the floor, his legs too weak to support him anymore. "This is impossible," he said. "This doesn't happen in real life. Your idea of what's possible is much smaller than reality actually is," Zara said, moving closer to him. As she approached, Jake could feel warmth radiating from her skin, but it wasn't the kind of warmth that came from body heat. It was more like standing near a campfire or feeling sunshine on his face. "How long have you been a not human?" Jake asked. "I've been on your world for longer than you might think," Zara replied. "Decades. I've been studying your species, trying to understand how you live, how you think, how you feel. Your people are fascinating to us, my kind. We've been watching Earth for a very long time. Most humans never notice us because we're careful to stay hidden. But something about you made me want to try living among you more closely. You pay attention to things that others miss. You see details that most people ignore." Jake thought about all the strange things he had noticed about Zara over the past months. Her perfect appearance, her silent movements, the way she never seemed to eat or sleep, the mysterious empty room. "I knew something was different about you," he said. "But I never imagined anything like this. I didn't mean for you to discover me this way," Zara said. "Usually, I'm much more careful about separating from my physical form. Jake Martinez was the kind of guy who liked his life simple and predictable. I've been more relaxed than I've been in decades. He woke up at 7 a.m. You made me feel safe enough to let his guard down, and caught the struggle to process everything he was hearing. He worked as a computer programmer for Why did you want to live with me specifically? Fixing bugs Zara and software so she was at a level never even noticed. And Jake could see galaxies swirling in the depths of her blue eyes. But it paid the bills and kept his mind busy. Jake, the only problem with humans are so focused on their own small worlds that they barely notice anything money itself. Around the lack of it. But you see two-bedroom apartment, you question things that don't make more than he could afford. You've been aware that something was $1,800 from the very beginning, which ate up most of his paycheck. Jake had been looking for. Now that I know what roommate for almost 3 months quiet now, for a long and it was getting desperate. And Jake could see her with so many people that they all started to blur together. When she finally spoke, there was the guy who wanted to turn the living room understand into his personal she was about to tell him. The woman who insisted change everything, painting every wall bright purple. Now you have to make a choice. The college student who seemed because your species is approaching something. He was planning to throw parties. A turning point that will determine one person even everyone if they could keep their pet snake in the bathroom. Might be the key to helping Jake your was people starting survive. To think he might have to move coming? Back. Jake and with his parents, feeling like he was falling through old, space. Felt like admitting just defeat. A few hours then ago. Then came that rainy biggest worry had been fixing a bug when everything changed. Code. Jake now he was sitting on his bedroom floor, scrolling through talking to a being made of light who was telling him that someone knocked on his door. Somehow he wasn't expecting anyone. What kind of choice? Through the peephole he asked. Standing outside was a woman he had never seen before. Out and gently touched his hand. In a way that made Jake felt like warm electricity. Her skin was so pale it almost seemed the choice of whether to remain who you are now. Her hair was to become something more than you ever imagined possible. That looked natural. Jake spent the rest of that night sitting on his bedroom floor, attention trying to wrap his mind around. They were the brightest blue he had ever seen. She had moved like looking into a clear mountain lake on a sunny day. Jake opened looking more human, feeling suddenly aware that he was wearing his oldest T-shirt. Her floating above his bed, combed his hair. But now that he knew what she really was, he asked. Jake could see all the little signs he had missed. I heard you might have a room available. The way light seemed to bend slightly. Her voice was soft and pleasant. How her breathing was just a little too perfect that Jake couldn't identify. The fact that she cast almost no shadow, Jake despite the lamp he had posted ads online. I need you to explain this to me slowly. Most people called or sent messages first. His hands just showed up at his door because my brain feels like it's about to explode. Yes. Zara nodded understandingly. Would you like to see it? Me to start? That would be wonderful. Start with why you're here. Stepping inside when he moved back. What do you and your people want? By the way, we don't want anything from you. Leading her toward the spare bedroom. Think of us as scientists. He noticed she studying how different species develop. Her footsteps barely made any sound on the wooden floor, but it's become particularly interesting. Was basic, but recently Jake felt a window facing the street. Enough space for a bed. Your species is approaching what we call consciousness threshold. Jake had seen at least 20 people. It's a point in development that every intelligent species found something to complain about. A moment when they either evolved beyond their physical limitations, closet wasn't big enough, or they didn't like the color of the walls. In which one are we heading toward? Sarah looked around for maybe 30 seconds, for a moment, then nodded. Glowing eyes. This is perfect. That's what makes your species so fascinating. Jake was so surprised. Civilizations we observe follow predictable patterns. Don't you want to know about the rent or see the rest of the apartment? You're unpredictable. Most people have questions about utilities, but also capable parking, incredible growth, and compassion. How much is the rent? We honestly don't know which way you go. $900 a month. Jake stood up and started pacing around his small bedroom. Comes to about another process while sitting still. Sarah reached into her purse. So you're here to watch us either evolve or here's 6 months in advance. But you said I have some kind of choice to make. Jake opened the envelope. What does that have to do with $6,000? The next 5 years are critical. Zara said. He had never seen so much money technologies that could either elevate your entire species. Wow. Are you become something like us? Most people just tear your world apart through war. I prefer to pay an environmental collapse. Zara said simply. We've been preparing to intervene if necessary. Jake wanted to ask easier for him. Very strict about interfering in the natural development of other species. After months of dealing with difficult people. But there is one exception. Here was someone if a member of the species being observed volunteers to serve as a bridge between our peoples. Problem and limited intervention becomes possible. Do you need references or anything? Jake stopped pacing and stared at her. Remembering he was supposed to be responsible about this kind of thing. I'm asking you to consider smile. Zara said and carefully, for just a moment, it's not a decision something to make flickered in her eyes that Jake couldn't identify. Exactly. I prefer to keep my past Zara private. Stood up and moved to the window. But I can promise. Looking out at the city lights. I'm a very good roommate. When she spoke, I'm quiet. Her voice was softer, things clean, more uncertain, and I won't cause Jake any trouble. Ever heard it. Looking back later, your life as Jake Martinez would warning sign. You would be transformed. Normal people had jobs they could talk about. Not human. Friends but not like us either. Previous hybrid consciousness could give references, can exist in both realities. He was just grateful to find someone who seemed normal and had serving as a translator between our species and yours. Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. Jake laughed, looking down thinking she was joking. But Zara's expression didn't change. I mean, she was completely serious. Your memories would remain. Don't you need your understanding of reality would expand in ways that I don't have much stuff. Your current existence seemed like a shadow. I live a simple life. You would gain abilities that was how current mind can't even imagine. You would see the universe as it truly is. Zara had not just the tiny slice that human senses can perceive. That
no
sounds
furniture,
incredible.
No boxes
Jake
of
said.
books.
Slowly.
No kitchen supplies.
But you don't sound happy
Jake
about
offered
it.
to help her
Zara
get
turned
settled,
back to face
but she
him.
said she preferred
And Jake
to
saw
handle
something
things
in her
herself.
expression that
For the
surprised
first few
him.
days,
It looked
Jake
almost
hardly
like grief.
saw her because
She
she would
said she
also
worked
work
night
night things
shifts
that you
at
can
some
never
kind
get
of
back.
research
She
facility
said
outside the city.
the simple pleasure
She
of
would
tasting
leave
food,
round
the way
sunset and
sunshine
come
feels
back
on
just
human
before
skin,
dawn.
the particular
During the
joy
day,
that comes from
she stayed
connecting
in her
with
room,
another person,
presumably
who shares
sleeping.
her exact
It was
type
exactly
of
what
consciousness.
Jake had
You would
hoped
become
for in a
something
roommate,
unprecedented,
someone who wouldn't get in
which
his
means
way,
you would
or
also
disrupt
become
his
very
routine.
alone.
Jake
But as
sat
the
down
first
heavily
week
on his
turned into
bed.
the second,
Have others
Jake
made this
started
choice
noticing
before?
little things that
On
seemed
other
off.
worlds,
For
few,
one thing,
very
Zara
few,
never seemed.
it requires a
to eat
special
anything.
type of person.
His
Someone
refrigerator
curious
and
enough
pantry
to
looked
want to see
exactly
beyond
the
their
same
current
as
reality,
before she moved
but
in.
also
When he
strong
asked
enough
her
to
about
give.
it, she
Of
said she
everything
usually
familiar
ate
for
at
the
work
sake
or
of
grabbed
others.
something while
What
she was
happens
out.
if I say
Fair
no?
enough, nothing
Jake
changes.
Lots
Zara
of people
replied,
lived.
That
The
way,
transformation
then
will
there
happen,
were his
or it won't.
electronics.
Based
His
on your
laptop,
species' own
which had
choices.
always worked
Your
perfectly,
people are clever
started
and
doing
resourceful.
weird things. You might
Programs
figure
would be running
it out
when
on
you
your
woke
own,
up that he was
but
sure
our
he
chances are
hadn't opened.
better with a bridge.
His smart TV would turn
significantly
on by
better.
itself.
Yes. In the
Jake
middle of
walked
the night,
over to his
always
dresser
tuned to
and picked up
channels
a
that
photo
showed
of his
nothing
family
but
from
static.
last Christmas.
His phone began
His
receiving
parents,
calls
his
from
sister
numbers
with her
that weren't
kids,
real
all
phone
of them
numbers
smiling
at all,
and
just
laughing
random
around the
strings
dinner
of
table.
digits that
They
didn't
looked
follow
so
any
normal,
pattern he
so
recognized.
wonderfully ordinary.
Jake mentioned
Would
these
they
problems to
even
Zara
remember
one
him
evening
if he
when they
became
happened
something
something
else
else
entirely?
At the same time,
Would I still be able
she
to
was
see
standing
them?
by the window.
My family,
looking
my
out
friends,
at the street with
you
that
could see them.
strange,
Zara
distant
said
expression
gently,
she
but they
often
wouldn't
wore.
be able to see
Maybe
you
you
as
should
you really
call
are.
someone to look
You
at
would
them.
have to maintain
She
a
suggested
human
without
appearance
turning
when
around.
interacting with
Electronics
them,
can be
even
unpredictable.
The connection
Her
wouldn't
tone
be the
was so
same.
casual.
You would be looking
so
at them from
unconcerned.
across a
That
vast
Jake
gulf
found
of
it more
consciousness
disturbing than helpful.
that they couldn't cross.
These weren't
Jake
normal
set the
technical
photo
problems
down and looked at
his
himself
laptop
in the
was
mirror
only
above
6
his
months old.
dresser,
And his phone was
28
brand
years
new.
old.
Brown
TVs
hair
didn't
that
just
never wanted to
turn
stay
themselves
mute.
on for
Eyes
no
that looked
reason.
tired from too many
But
late
Zara
nights
acted
at
like
work.
this kind
Just
of thing
an ordinary
happened
guy
all the
who
time.
fixed computer
As
bugs
October
and
turned
worried
into
about
November,
paying rent.
Jake
How
began
had he
to
ended
feel
like
like
he
he
was
was
living
living
with
with
a
a
ghost?
ghost.
The
Zara
future
was
of humanity
always
might
polite
depend
when
on
they
a
crossed
decision
paths,
he made, but she never.
Why me?
Really
He asked.
seemed present.
I'm nobody
She would
special.
nod and smile.
I'm not a scientist
and make
or
small
leader
talk about
or
the
someone
weather.
important.
But her eyes
I write
always
code for a
looked like
small
she
tech
was thinking
company
about
that most
something
people
else
have
never
never
heard
heard
of. Something
That's
far
exactly.
away.
Jake
Why
told
it has to be
himself he was
someone like
being
you,
paranoid.
Zara said.
So what if his
Leaders
roommate was
and
a little
famous
weird?
people are too
She paid her
visible
rent on
to
time,
connect it to
kept her
existing power
space clean,
structures.
and
They
didn't
have too
bother
much
him.
to lose.
After
and too
all
many
the terrible
people watching
roommate
them.
stories he had
We
heard
need
from
someone who can
friends,
work quietly.
he should be grateful.
Someone who
But late
understands
at night,
ordinary
when
people
his
because
TV
they
turned
are
on by
ordinary
itself, or
people.
his phone rang
Jake
with
turned to face her
impossible
fully.
numbers.
If
Jake
I couldn't
couldn't
shake
shake
the
the
feeling
feeling
that bringing
what would I
Zara
actually
into his
do?
life How would
Had
I help
somehow
humanity
opened a door
evolve
to something
You would
he
use your
didn't
unique
understand.
position to
He had
influence
no
key
idea how
decisions
right
at crucial
he was,
moments.
or how much
Guide
stranger
breakthroughs
things were about
discoveries
to become.
toward helpful
By the time
applications
November
instead of
arrived,
destructive.
Jake had been living with
Ones
Zara
helped
for
the right
almost a
people
month,
meet each other
and he was starting
at
to
the right
realize
times
just how
prevent
little he
catastrophic
actually knew about
mistakes
his
before
roommate.
they happened.
At first,
Small actions
he had
that
been
create
so
big
relieved
changes
to find someone
like
who
a
seemed
guardian
normal
angel
and paid
more
rent
like a
on
gardener
time
that he hadn't
Zara
asked
said
too
with
many
a small
questions.
smile.
But now,
helping good
those
things
questions
grow
were
up,
keeping
preventing
him
weeds
awake
from
at
taking
night.
over.
The biggest
Jake
mystery
walked
was
back
Zara's
to the
schedule
window
and
she
looked out
claimed
at the
to work
sleeping
night
city.
shifts,
Thousands
leaving
of people
every
going
evening
about
around
their
7
lives
and
completely
completely just before
unaware that
sunrise.
beings from another
But
reality
Jake had
were watching
started
them,
paying
closer
them,
attention,
waiting to see
and
what they
something
would
didn't
become.
add up. The weight
When
of
he
that
got up to
knowledge
use the
felt
bathroom
enormous.
in the middle of the
How
night,
long do I
he
have
never
to
heard
decide?
her moving around.
Not long.
No
Zara
footsteps
admitted.
in the hallway.
The critical period
No
is
shower
beginning
running.
soon. No sounds
If you're
of
going
someone
to
getting
accept,
ready for work.
the
It
transformation
was like
needs
the
to happen
apartment was
within the
completely
next few
empty
days.
except for him. Jake closed
One
it.
Saturday
Eyes
morning,
and tried to
Jake
imagine
decided decided
what
to
it
test
would
his
feel
theory.
like to give up
He made
everything
coffee
he had
and
ever
sat at the
known.
kitchen
Table,
his job,
pretending
his
to read
apartment,
news on his
human
laptop
body,
while actually
his
watching
ordinary
the hallway.
life. At
All of it
exactly
gone in
6:45,
exchange for something he
he
couldn't
heard
even
Zara's
properly
bedroom door
understand.
open.
But then
She
he
appeared
thought
in the
about his
hallway,
family's
dressed
photo,
in dark clothes
about
that
all
looked
the people in the
expensive,
city
but
below,
somehow timeless.
about the entire
Her
human
silver
race
hair was
standing at a
perfect,
crossroads
as
without
always,
even knowing it.
and her skin
Could he
had
really
that
walk
same
away
pale
from a
glow he
chance
had
to help
noticed
them,
the first
even
night
if it
they
meant
met?
sacrificing
Good morning.
everything
She said,
he was?
giving
I
him
need
that
some
polite
time to
smile
think.
he had
He
grown
said,
accustomed
finally.
to.
Zara nodded.
Morning,
Of
Jake
course.
replied,
But
heading to
Jake,
work.
there's
Yes.
one more thing
Another
you need
long
to know
night ahead,
before you decide.
Zara said.
He turned
Walking
to look
toward
at
her
her
front door
and saw that
Jake
her eyes
waited
were
until
glowing
he heard
more
the door
brightly
close.
now.
Then
Filled
quickly
with
moved to the
emergency
living room
that hadn't
window
been there
that faced
before.
the street. The window
watched
for
as
this
Zara
choice
walked
is
down the
closing
front
faster
steps of
than
their
we
building
expected.
and onto the
Something is
sidewalk.
accelerating
But
the
instead of
timeline.
heading
If
toward
you're going
the
to
bus
say
stop
yes
or looking for
it has
a
to be
taxi
very
like
soon.
any normal
The
person
urgency in
would,
Zara's
she
voice
simply
sent a wave
continued
of
walking
panic
down
through
the
Jake's
street
chest.
until she
He
disappeared.
had thought he would have
Round the
days,
corner,
maybe
Jake grabbed
even
his
weeks,
jacket
to
and
make the
followed
most
Dot by the
important
time he
decision
reached
of
the
his
corner.
life.
Zara
Now
was
it sounded
nowhere
like
to
he
be
might
seen.
only have
Jake
ours.
walked for 3
What do
blocks
you mean
in the
the
direction she
timeline
had been heading,
is accelerating?
checking every
Jake asked,
doorway and
his mouth
side
suddenly
street.
dry.
But it was
Zara
like
moved away
she
from
had
the
vanished
window
into thin
and
air.
sat back down
He stood
on
there
his
on the
bed.
sidewalk
For the first time
feeling
since he had
foolish
known
and
her.
confused.
She looked
How could someone
genuinely
just
worried.
disappear
We've
like
been
that?
monitoring
When he got
certain
back to the
developments on your
apartment,
world.
Jake decided
Scientific
to do
breakthroughs.
something. He
Political
probably
tensions,
shouldn't have done.
environmental
He
changes,
listened at Zara's
all the
bedroom
factors
door.
that contribute
Complete
to a
silence.
species
He
either
knocked,
evolving
softly
or destroying
and waited.
itself.
No response.
Something has shifted
After a
in the
few
past.
minutes of internal
few
debate,
weeks,
he
shifted
gently
how.
tried the door
Several
handle.
critical
It
discoveries
turned
are happening
easily,
faster
and the
than
door
we
swung
predicted.
open.
Technologies
Jake's
that
jaw
we thought
dropped.
were still years
The room
away
was
are being
completely
developed
empty.
right now.
In
Not
laboratories
just
around your world,
but actually
some of
empty.
these could
There
help
was
your
no bed,
species
no
transcend
dresser,
its
no
limitations.
clothes.
Hanging
Others
in the
could
closet,
end your civilization.
the walls were
within
bare.
months.
The
Jake
floor
felt
was
like he
clean,
was drowning
and
in
there wasn't a
information
single
that was too
personal
big for his
item
brain to
anywhere.
process.
It looked exactly
Can't you
like
just
it
tell
had
your
the
people
day
to intervene
before Zara
anyway?
moved and Dot
Forget
Jake
about your
stood in the
laws for
doorway.
once.
His
It
mind
doesn't work
racing.
that way.
This was
Zara
impossible.
said sadly.
He had
Our
seen
laws
Zara
exist
coming
for
and
good
going from this
reasons.
room every day for
We've
weeks.
seen what happens.
Where did she
when
sleep?
advanced species
Where were her
interfere
clothes?
directly
Where
in the development
was
of
all
younger.
the stuff that
Once,
normal people
it usually
accumulated
ends
when they
in
lived
disaster
somewhere?
for everyone
He spent the
involved.
next hour
Jake
searching
started
the entire
pacing
apartment.
again.
His
Looking
bare
for
feet
any
making
sign
soft
of where
sounds on the
Zara
wooden
might
floor.
actually be staying.
Outside his
He
window,
checked closets.
the first hints of
looked
dawn
under
were beginning
furniture,
to show
even
in the eastern
open cabinets
sky.
in the kitchen.
In a few hours,
Nothing.
The city
It was like she
would wake up
existed and
only
millions
in the
of
brief
people would
moments
go
when
about
Jake
their normal
actually saw
Saturday
her.
routines.
That
Completely
evening,
unaware
Jake
that the
positioned
fate of their
himself in the living
species
room with
might
a clear
be decided
view
in a
of
small
the front
apartment
door.
bedroom.
He wanted to
I
see
need to
how Zara
understand
would
what I
react
actually
when she
became
getting
home.
into, and
Jake
found out he
said-
had discovered her
he
secret.
said I'd become
But
something
7
new,
o'clock came,
something
and
that's
went with
never
no sign
existed
of her.
before.
So
But
what
at
does
8
that
o'clock
actually mean
and
day
9
to day?
and 10
Zara
dot
was
finally,
quiet for a
around
moment.
11:30.
Choosing her words
Jake heard a
carefully.
key in the lock.
At first,
Zara
you would
walked
still
in
look
looking
human to
exactly
most
the
people,
same as when
but
she
you would
had left
see
that
and
morning.
understand
Her
things
clothes
that no
weren't
human
wrinkled.
has ever
Her
experienced.
hair wasn't messed
You'd
up.
be
And she
able to
didn't look
perceive
tired like
dimensions
someone
of
who had
reality
just
that
finished
are
a long
currently
shift at
invisible
work.
to your species.
How was work?
You would
Jake
know things
asked,
about the
trying to
universe
keep
that
his
would
voice
seem like
casual.
magic to other
Fine.
humans.
Thank you.
That sounds
Zara
amazing,
replied.
Jake
I
said.
think I'll
Go
go
to
to
making
bed
it
now.
sound terrible
Zara,
at the same
wait,
time. Jake
because
said.
it would be both.
Standing up, Zara replied.
I need to ask you something.
Imagine knowing
She
the
turned
cure
to
for
look at
every
him,
disease,
and for just a
the
second,
solution to every
Jake thought
problem
he saw
your
something
species
flicker in her
faces,
bright
but
blue
only
eyes.
being able
Something
to
that
reveal
wasn't
that
entirely
information
human.
in tiny pieces
What is
over many
it,
years.
Jake?
Imagine
I went
watching
into
people
your room
you
today.
care about
He
make
said,
decisions that
"It's
you know
empty,
will hurt them,
completely
but
empty.
not being able
Where
to
do you
simply
actually
tell them
sleep?"
what to do
Zara
because
was
they wouldn't
quiet for a
understand
long
or
moment.
believe you.
Studying
Jake
his face.
stopped pacing and
Then
looked
she
at her.
laughed.
Is
But
that
it
what
didn't
it's
sound
been?
quite right.
Like for you,
It was to musical,
watching us
like
and
wind
not being
chimes
able
in
to
a
help.
gentle breeze.
Yes, I'm
She said
redecorating.
simply. She
It's the
said,
hardest part
I
of
moved
what we
everything
do.
into
Jake
storage
sat
while I
down in a
decide
chair
how.
at his desk.
I want to arrange
suddenly
things.
feeling exhausted.
I've been sleeping
the
on
weight
an
of
air
the decision
mattress.
was crushing.
Jake wanted to point
on one
out
hand,
that he hadn't seen
he could
any
stay
air
exactly
mattress
who he was
or any
and hope
sign that anyone had been
humanity
sleeping
figured
in
things
that
out
room
on
at
its
all.
own. But something
On the
in
other
Zara's
hand,
expression
he
warned
could
him not to
sacrifice
push too hard.
everything familiar about
he
his
said,
existence for
that
the
makes
chance
sense.
to help guide his
I guess
species
I
towards
should have
survival.
mentioned it.
What
Zara
would happen
said.
to my
I
family?
didn't want to bother
Jake
you
asked
with the details.
to my parents
After
my
she
sister,
disappeared into
her
her
kids.
room.
Would
Jake
they just
lay in
think
bed
I'd
staring at
disappeared?
the ceiling.
We would arrange
The
for them to
redecorating
believe you had
explanation
taken
was
a job
obviously
overseas.
fake.
But what was
Zara
the real
said
truth?
They would receive
Was there some
occasional
kind of
messages
criminal
from
hiding from the
you,
police?
letting
Was
them
she
know
involved
you
in
were safe
something
and
illegal
doing
that
important
required
work
her
that
to keep required you to stay away for long?
Or was there an?
It's
Even
not ideal,
stranger explanation,
but it's the
that
kindest
Jake's
way.
rational mind
Jake thought
wasn't
about
ready
his
to
nephew's
consider.
birthday party
Over
last
the next
month.
few days.
The little boy had
Jake
been
became
so
excited
obsessed
to
with
show
watching
Jake his
their
new
more
toy
carefully.
robot.
He started
Explaining in
noticing
great
things
detail
that he
how
had
all the
somehow
parts
missed
worked.
before.
Would Jake
She
ever
never
see him
seemed to
grow up?
blink.
Would he
Not
ever
even
get to
once
teach
during
him
their
how to ride a
conversations,
bike or
when
help
she
him with
walked.
homework?
Her feet
And I
barely
could
seemed
never
to
come
touch the
back.
ground.
Never
Like she was
just be
floating
Jake
just
Martinez
slightly
again.
above the floor.
The transformation
Her skin
can't
never
be
showed
undone.
any
Zara
imperfections,
said gently,
no scars.
once you
no
become
freckles,
rage,
no signs
there's no
of
way
aging
to return
or
to
wear.
what you were
Most
before.
disturbing
Your
of all,
consciousness would be
Jake realized
fundamentally
that he had
different.
never
Jake
actually
buried
seen
his head
Zara
in his
eat
hands
or drink anything.
This was impossible.
Not once. How could
She would
anyone
hold a
make
glass
a
of
choice
water
like this?
sometimes
How
when
could he give
they
up his
talked in the
entire
kitchen,
identity?
but
his
Jake
entire
never saw
life,
her actually
for something
take a
he
sip.
didn't even
She
fully
claimed to eat at
understand.
work,
But then
Jake
thought
had
about
started
all the
checking the
problems
refrigerator
facing the
obsessively.
world,
And nothing
climate
ever
change,
went missing.
wars,
Jake also
poverty,
noticed that his
disease.
electronic
What if
problems
humanity
were getting
really
worse.
was on the verge
His
of
laptop
either
would
solving
be running
all of
strange
these issues,
programs when he
or
woke
making them so much
programs
worse
with
that
names
civilization
written in symbols he
collapsed
didn't
entirely?
recognize?
What if he
His
really
TV
could
now
make the
turn
difference
every
between
single
those two
night
outcomes?
at exactly 3:33
There's something else I need to tell you.
Always
Zara
showing
said
the same
quietly.
channel of static.
Jake looked up at
His
her.
phone had
Not
started
sure he could
displaying
handle
text
any
messages
more
that
revelations.
appeared to be written
I wasn't
in code.
supposed to tell
Strings
you about
of numbers
of
and
this.
symbols that
My
hurt
people
his eyes
sent
to
me
look
here
at.
to observe.
When Jake tried to
Not to
show these
recruit someone
messages
as a
to his
bridge.
coworkers,
That
or
decision
friends,
was supposed to
they
be
would
made by our
mysteriously
leaders
disappear
through official
from his
channels.
phone. So
It
why
was
are you
like the
telling
messages
me?
only
Because I've
existed
been living
when he was
among
alone
humans
in the
for
apartment.
decades.
He
But
started taking
these past months with
screenshots.
you have taught
But
me
even
something
those
new
would be
about
corrupted
your
or
species.
empty when
You're
he
not
tried
just
to show them
fascinating
to
to
other
study.
people.
You're worth
The
saving.
breaking point came on
All
a
of you.
Thursday evening.
Jake saw
when
something
Jake
in
was
her
working
eyes that
late
he had
on his
never
laptop
noticed
in the
before.
living room.
Despite
He
being an
heard
energy
Zara's
being
door
from another
open
dimension,
and closed.
despite
But when he
having
looked
abilities
up,
he couldn't
she wasn't in
imagine,
the hallway.
Zara cared.
A few minutes
About
later,
him,
he heard
not
the
just
front
as a
door
research
open
subject
and close,
or a potential
but he
bridge,
hadn't seen
but as a
anyone walk
person,
past him to
if
get
I
there.
do this.
Jake got
Jake
up
said
and checked
slowly,
Zara's room
"What
again.
happens to you?
Empty.
I'll
as
probably be in
always.
trouble with
He
my
checked
superiors
every
for
other
acting
room in the
without
apartment.
authorization.
No one there.
But that's
But he
not
was absolutely
important.
certain he had
Right
heard
now,
someone moving around.
Jake stood up and walked
That
to his
night,
window.
Jake made
looking
a
out
decision.
at the city.
He
as
was
it
going to
slowly
stay
came
awake
life.
and watch.
Street
He
lights
was
were
going to
beginning
figure
to
out
turn off
what was
automatically.
really going on with
A
his
few
mysterious
early joggers
roommate,
were making their
even
way
if it
down the
meant giving up
sidewalks.
sleep.
In apartment
Something was
buildings
very
all
wrong in
around.
his apartment.
Him and
People
he
were
were
starting
starting
to
to what
wake
it
up,
was before
make
he
coffee,
lost his mind.
check their phones,
completely
begin
died. He had
another
no
ordinary
idea
day.
that the truth
None of them
would be
knew
far
that their future
stranger
hung in
than
balance.
anything his
None of them
imagination
knew
could
that a
have
decision
prepared him
made
for.
in this room.
The night that
In the
changed
next few minutes
everything started
might
like
determine
any other
whether
Friday
they lived
evening
to see
in
their
late
grandchildren
November.
grow
Jake
up in
had
a
been
world
working
of
on a
wonder
particularly
and
difficult
possibility.
coding project,
or whether
at the
everything they
office.
had ever
trying to
built
fix
would
a bug
crumble
that
into
had been
dust.
driving him
I
crazy
have one
for
more
weeks.
question.
His
Jake
boss
said
had
without
been breathing
turning
down
around.
his neck about the
What is it?
deadline.
If I
and
become
Jake
this
found
bridge
himself
person,
staying later,
will I still be able to
each
feel
night
love?
just to keep
Will I
up?
still be able
By
to
the time
care
he
about
finally
individual
solved
people?
the problem,
Or will
and
I
saved
become
his
so
work?
focused on
It
the
was
big
already
picture
past
that
2 in the
individuals
morning.
stop mattering?
Office
That's the
building
most
was
important
completely
question
empty
you could
except for the
ask,
security
Zara
guard
said.
downstairs.
And Jake could hear
Jake
the
packed
smile
up
in
his
her
laptop,
voice.
grabbed
The
his
answer is
jacket,
yes,
and
in
headed
fact.
home through the
Caring
quiet
about
streets of
individuals
Portland.
is what makes
A light
someone
rain was
suitable
falling,
to be a bridge,
making the street
the first
blur
place
into golden
if you
halos.
stop
in the
caring
darkness.
about people,
All Jake
you wouldn't
wanted
be
was to get
effective at
home,
helping them.
brush his
Jake
teeth,
took one last
and
look
fall
at his
into bed.
reflection in the
He
window
was exhausted
glass.
in a way
Jake
that
Martinez,
went deeper than just
28
being
years
tired.
old,
Computer
stress of
programmer,
work,
ordinary
combined
guy
with
with
all the
ordinary
weird
stuff
problems
happening at
in
home with
a
Zara.
few minutes
had been
he
wearing
might
him
cease
down
to
for
exist
weeks.
forever.
He kept
But
telling
maybe,
himself that
just
he was
maybe,
overthinking
something
things.
better would take
that
his
there had
place.
to be logical
Something that could
explanations
help
for
ensure
everything
that
he had
all
been
the people
noticing.
reflected in
Jake
all
climbed
the
the
windows
stairs to his second
across
floor
the city
apartment.
would have a
His
chance
footsteps
to become
echoing
more
in the empty
than
hallway.
they had ever
He
dreamed
fumbled,
possible.
with his
Jake
keys
turned
for a
around to
moment,
face Zara,
then quietly
his
let
decision
himself
finally
in.
made.
The apartment
Okay,
was dark
he said,
and silent.
I'll do it.
Just as he
The smile
expected
that
it to
spread
be.
across
Zara
Zara's
should
face
have been
was
at
like
work at
watching
her
the serious
sunrise.
night job.
Beautiful
and
and
Jake
full of
was
hope
looking
for what was
forward to
coming
having
next.
the place to
Are you
himself
sure?
for.
I'm
A few
terrified.
hours.
Jake
dropped his
admitted,
laptop bag
but I'm
by
sure.
the door and headed
What happened
straight
next
for his
would
bedroom.
change
Not
not
just
just
Jake's
Jake's turn
life,
on any lights,
but the entire
He
future
knew
of
the
the
layout
human
of his
species.
apartment well enough
And it
to
all
navigate
started
in the
with a
dark.
simple
But
choice
as he
made
pushed
by an
open his
ordinary
bedroom
man
door,
who decided that
Jake froze in
sometimes
absolute
the
shock.
most important thing
There
you
was
can
someone
do
in
is
his
stop
bed
being who you
for
are
a split second
and become who.
Jake thought
the world
he must
needs
have
you to
walked
be.
into the wrong